Derek Wheatley, and welcome to episode 228 of the Weekly podcast. Thank you very much for joining us, wherever you're doing so. Thanks for listening. Last week, I spoke a little bit about the move, and I obviously talk about mental health in this podcast. So the moves are stressful enough, houses and apartments, wherever you're going. So I had the anxiety on top of that. Spoke a bit about that, and the whole idea of getting the music going again, being in my own space and stuff like that. You can subscribe to us on YouTube if you like, and there's a link for Buy Me a Coffee there. I'm very excited for our guest this week. He is a musician, an author, and a professor of music theory, and his name is Brad Osborn. How you doing, Brad?
I'm really good. Thanks for having me on, Derek.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm delighted to have you on. For people who don't know, I've heard Brad speak on music theory a couple of times on podcasts, and I was really hoping I was reaching out a bit, Brad, to America and the idea of the time zones, and then you're kind of like, I might be up at 12 at night time. That's way past my bedtime, but you're up a bit earlier than me, to be fair.
Yeah, I actually got up this morning at 5 to ride my gravel bike 23 miles with some friends. So I've been up for three
Wow.
and a half hours, man.
A gravel bike. Now, is that one of those ones with the big tires?
It sure is.
And is it motorized or it's like an actual you're doing the work?
Oh, I'm definitely doing the work. There are
Yeah.
some people these days who are getting into the motorized bikes, but it's my primary form of exercise and movement, which is a crucial part of my mental health. We can get into that a little bit
Yeah.
later, but yeah, so for now at this point in my life, it's all me pedaling.
Brilliant. Yeah, because it's kind of cheating if you have an. I know I'm only joking. Of course, I actually, and coming from me who has an electric bike, it's some cheek to call other people cheats. But Brad, we always start at the beginning. Can you give us a short history of your upbringing, please?
Sure. I grew up in the Ozark Mountains of Missouri, and then I went off to college. I went to Seattle, and I was actually playing in a punk rock band, living in a van, when I got the phone call from the dean saying, like, "Hey, would you like to come study music theory?
Mhm.
We're offering you a full ride." So I basically went from that to being a professor. Lived in New York City for a while with my wife, and I've been living in Lawrence, Kansas, teaching here for 11 years.
You've got around a bit. It's not like here in Ireland where you can go to Dublin. It's an hour away. Like that. I think I've asked people about this before. I think the longest trip in a car in Ireland is from Donegal up at the top at the north to Cork right down the bottom. And I think someone said it was 8 hours, but I don't believe them. I think it's shorter than that. But who am I to
Yeah.
say?
Having recently this fall driven a car from Cork back to Dublin, on the wrong side of the road, mind you. Yeah, it's a pretty small country. You can cover a lot of ground in the time it takes you to cross one state in my country.
Yeah. Did you enjoy your time in Ireland?
I quite liked Cork.
Okay.
Previous to this trip, I had only been to Dublin, which is, I always said I'd been to Dublin, not Ireland.
Yeah.
So I think this time I went a little slower. I spent some time at Cork, and then I kind of drove slowly along the southeast coast, saw
Mm,
some beaches, swam in the Irish Sea. It was very nice.
beautiful, beautiful. The right place to be, Cork. I have to mention my mom's from there. Every time Cork comes up, Cork people, you may have noticed, Brad, are immensely proud people that they're actually from Cork. They will bring it up immediately when you meet them that they're from actually from Cork, the real republic, the real capital of Ireland. And yeah, they will always tell you that. They talk about it. So I have to mention it every time someone mentions Cork. She'll be delighted. Brad, you mentioned there about exercise and mental health, but when did you first become aware of mental health?
Yeah, great question. So I remember in graduate school, a lot of my cohort, we were all doing PhDs in music theory, and they were stressed out all the time. And now I happen to be living in like a hippie commune with 13 people, and like we had chickens and things. And so they would be stressed out talking about how they were going to pull an all-nighter, and I was like, y'all, I got a chicken coop to build. And so I had a good life balance at that point. It wasn't until I actually got my first job as a professor, and I don't know if many readers here are familiar with what it's like to be a professor, at least in the US, but it's very much like a publish or perish mentality.
Mhm.
So you have to be working all the time. It was at that point that I realized that having all these deadlines, having all these looming responsibilities was causing me to be anxious in a way that I never had before. And so I think actually being a professor does attract a lot of anxious people.
Hmm.
We're just very productive and sort of like working through things, but I'm not sure about the chicken the egg problem, right? Like,
Hmm.
is it the job that causes you to do that, or are naturally anxious people kind of driven toward this life of writing? But in any case, yeah, I found that really for me, it's the exercise, the constant movement that helps me process that sort of thing. So that this morning, like I'm planning on doing some writing after I get off this podcast, but I've already like my body is physically exhausted from that hard bike ride this morning, and that's a good feeling for me personally. I know that that doesn't work for everyone, but being able to sit in that chair and feel like before I've ever accomplished anything intellectual today, I've really accomplished like my movement goal already.
At that, yeah, because I was just chatting to my friend about that this morning. We were doing some jujitsu just in our gym down the road, and we were talking about anxiety and how, the restless kind of energy of it, and how when you are doing something, whether it be something like physical or whether it be a mental kind of thing, you're expending that and it's passing out that anxiety for now, and then it comes back and then you build up, and it seems like it seemed like, like a cup of water. It just kind of fills and goes down, and that energy. But I expend my energy through exercise an awful lot, and I do find it helps, like as long as I'm not, going pushing it to the brink where I'm kind of then injured for 2 weeks because I did the wrong thing. And I'm sure you're the same. It's kind of, you have to balance it as well.
Yeah, in this new year, I've been taking I don't want to say like a resolution, but I'm a guy who used to ride my bike by myself a lot, way out in the country on mountain bike trails, etc. This year, I'm trying to ride in these group rides a little bit more. And wow, on Sunday, I was riding with these new guys who are really fast, and I was redlining. I mean, talk about pushed to the point of exhaustion. Might have been pushing it a little bit far on that ride. Luckily, these guys this morning were a little bit slower.
Yeah, but yeah, it's that idea of knowing you can't do it all the time. That
Yeah.
to push it one day is fine, but then the next. So people who don't know, so I listened to Brad on podcast before, and he's very clued in on one of my favorite bands, Radiohead,
Hmm.
and so that was what drew me to Brad. But what I didn't realize is Brad's got his own music project. And excuse me if I butcher it, but Darkipelago.
Yeah, it might be hard for someone from Ireland to say, but it's like you
Mm,
just say you say archipelago, but then the D in front of it. So Darkipelago. It's got that.
Darkipelago.
Look, it wouldn't be a metal band name if it were easy to pronounce, right?
This is very true. What I found brilliant, because we were just saying about you described it as shoegaze metal, and I immediately, my brain kind of got a bit scrambled, as if, can those two things survive together? How would you describe, go kind of pushing further on that? How would you describe your music?
Yeah, so it really does blend these kind of, I think you're right, what were originally two disparate styles. So you have shoegaze, very British style in the early 90s, bands like Slowdive, My Bloody Valentine, Ride. And then also at that same time, in Scandinavia, you have black metal, right?
Hmm.
So bands like Mayhem, Dark Throne. It wasn't really until the 2010s when some bands started kind of blending those aesthetics. So some bands people may have heard of include like Deaf Heaven or An Autumn for Crippled Children. Um, and like you can get a kind of instant shoegaze sound out of the box by just turning up the reverb on everything,
Yeah.
but it's more than just an effect. It becomes an aesthetic so that you're not going for this hyper masculine crystal clarity of like double kick attacks. It's like more of like an ambiance. The screams also become even more unintelligible because there's reverb behind them. And so as a person writing metal lyrics, you're not thinking about, okay, how can I communicate my poetic dreams to the audience. No, it's more of like, actually there's a really a big shoegaze. I'm just gonna say the word once, black gaze. That's what people are
Right.
calling this kind of subgenre. There's a black gaze band right now called Ghost Bath, who released several albums in which they were just screaming sounds, not
Oh,
words. Because like what does it matter anyway, right? Who can understand what the words are anyway? Yeah, so
I
that's
yeah.
kind of the genre or subgenre that I'm working in.
So is it just you, or is there? Is it just you on your own?
Yeah, it sounds like I'm in like a five-piece metal
Yeah.
band, but no, it's me doing everything. The drums, the guitar, the bass, the keyboards, and the vocals.
So I listened to your work from 2020, which is out. You can get it. People can get it on Apple and Spotify and things. But what really stood out for me, the song that stood out for me the most, and what I found fascinating about the songs on it though, is that they are quite almost like it's genreless. That in my eyes, that I don't that if I sat down without what you told me beforehand, and I sat down trying to figure out what it was, I would find it very difficult to kind of and that's not a bad thing to not be able to figure out what it is exactly. But when I listened to Shoulder Season, that was one that I had to
Hmm.
kind of. So I went back on it and I went back on it. And like first time I heard it without earphones, and then I put on the earphones, and then I was like, "This is interesting." I don't know what's quite going on because the vocals in that are slightly different. The effect on them is maybe slightly different, and it's not distortion up to the last. It's more. How would you describe that song? Because I think that's more maybe accessible.
Yeah, that's a great point. For all of what I said in the last 2 minutes about shoegazy black metal, that's my most recent record from 2024 called Evil Scissor. Now, I am a bit of a chameleon when it comes to genre. You're absolutely right. And so that 2020 record, particularly the last song, Shoulder
Mm,
Season you're talking about, is just pop.
mm,
I wouldn't, that's not metal at all. I'm singing, I'm not screaming. The quote unquote effect you heard in the vocals
mm.
is actually an instrument called the vocoder.
Oh yeah, yeah,
So yeah, it's not quite an effect. It's me. I guess for listeners who don't know what a vocoder is, I'll explain it, but be careful here because it's my favorite instrument. Um, you basically play the melody that you want to sing on the keyboard, and then you just speak the words, and the keyboard provides the melody. Now, because I'm a classically trained musician, I actually can't speak the words. I have to also sing them. But the vocoder is replacing all the pitch information with information from the keyboard.
I
Yeah, but so
go
that's
on.
just a pop song for me.
Yeah,
I mean, my third record was an entirely called Dark Machine, was an entirely instrumental, almost EDM record.
right.
I'm a genre chameleon. I listen to Dua Lipa. I listen to Mayhem. I listen to all kinds of things, and I am at a really nice place in my life where, like, most of my paycheck comes from being a professor. Like, I basically
Yeah,
have a day job. I can make whatever music I want without worry of how much money it's gonna make. So I
yeah.
don't feel any pressure in that part of my life.
Which is great for the idea of sitting down and maybe not saying, well, I've got to write 12 songs in this genre because this is what I'm put in this box. I put myself in this box really, but like something like Shoulder Season, for example, is kind of it's just something about the Pet Shop Boys or that kind of stuff. And
Mhm.
I've been listening to the Pet Shop Boys. I don't know why. Well, because they're great, but I've been listening to them a lot recently. And it just so happened when Shoulder Season came on, I was like, not that it was like, oh, it sounds like the Pet Shop Boys, but it was in that kind of place or something. There's something I could kind of attach it to. And that's obviously a very big compliment considering,
I
who
take
I'm
it as
speaking
such,
of.
yes.
Yes, exactly. But that, I was interested in a person who is a professor in music theory having to sit down and write a song. Does or can it overcomplicate the whole situation?
I have a short answer and a long answer to that. The
Go for
short
it.
answer is no.
Yeah.
I've never. People ask me this all the time about also listening to music. Does like having a PhD in music like ruin the experience, or you get into a song and you just ruin it because you think too much? And the answer is a resounding no. I've never liked a song less because I understand it more.
Yeah.
And I'll say kind of a similar thing about songwriting. I've never disliked the process of songwriting because I can see how the sausage gets made. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, have there been times in my life where I was very into, say, like changing time signatures and doing really wacky things with harmony because I was studying Beethoven at the time? Yes, those are some early 2000s records I've made, and I listen to them now, and they're a little bit cringe. But I don't feel pressure to do complicated things now just because I know how to. I think that's
Yeah.
maybe a more mature stage of my songwriting. Like this last Dark Archipelago record, I think there's a single bar of 3/4 in there, but otherwise the entire album is in 4/4. It's even though it's metal, it's in basically a major key the whole time. Like I'm not doing complicated things with harmony. I will say over 20 years of songwriting, the one consistent complicated thing I do is I basically, shoulder season notwithstanding, refuse to write in verse chorus forms.
Okay.
So if you listen to the new album from Dark Archipelago, Evil Scissor, it's entirely through composed. So
Right.
each song goes like section A, section B, section C, section D, done. Next song, section A, section B, section C, done. Um, and that's one thing I really like about my songwriting. It's a thing I love about Radiohead songwriting, and I can find myself very impatient with music that repeats choruses too many times.
That's or like kind of very timely in the situation I find myself in because having been opened up to the idea of musical theory, since I was maybe 14 or 15, I was writing songs, but they were very, verse, chorus, verse, bridge, chorus, to that. But when I heard you speak about Radiohead and I heard other people speak about, maybe bands like Tool or someone like who mess around with time signatures all over the place. I started getting dragged into the idea of like I can't just write 4/4 every. I can't all be 4/4, and they have to be this, this, this. And you described, and I might be wrong on this. That's a pun, by the way. If anyone doesn't know
Yeah,
radio,
I was
you got
about that.
it. Nobody else did. But 2 + 2 = 5 is one that you explained to me that was done in sections, like you said about the A, B, C, D. How difficult is it to write a song like that, though, considering we're so used to, coming out the radio, the verse chorus tradition?
Yeah. How difficult is it to write? I'll first answer the question about how difficult it is to sell that kind of music. Which like it's not gonna but the list of songs that are through composed like that are like radio hits are nearly non-existent
Yeah.
because the whole idea of like writing a catchy song almost relies on bringing that catchy part back one or more times, right? From a compositional standpoint, writing those songs, you could argue, takes like 4 times as much material per song because verse chorus, okay, what is you write one section, you write another, and then you just go back and forth between them, right? That's oversimplifying a little bit, but in a through composed form, you're having to generate new material for every second of the
Yeah.
composition. At the same time, it's a bit freeing though because um, a famous example of this is Happiness is a Warm Gun by the Beatles. That started out as 3 different song ideas, and then they merely stitched them together. And so if you're a person who works like that with maybe your voice memos, as I do, then writing a song can be kind of like a process of going back through your voice memos, finding 3 or 4 that work together, and then just stitching them together.
Yeah, it's the idea of needing, or at least you feel you need to write the hook, like you were saying about the catchy part. The hook is where it's all like, hanging on. But I'm not writing songs to make loads of money.
Mm.
It's an enjoyable. It should be an enjoyable experience, and it is for me now. Like I think I got caught in the weeds for quite a while about that idea of you have to be one way or another. You have to be like commercial, the whatever that might mean, or you have to be completely the opposite and go against the grain. And I think I got so messed up with that. I actually just stopped writing songs for quite a while. Like it was a good few years, and I'm only coming back to it now. But that is an interesting idea that I am trying to. I'm stuck between trying to write songs that maybe aren't my forte and writing songs that because like I don't want to write the songs that come more natural to me. But why would I like sabotage the idea that this song? It seems a
Yeah.
bizarre, but we feel like. Has that happened to you? That idea of like, do we need to kind of constantly be challenging ourselves to write something that's maybe not in our wheelhouse?
Yeah, sure. I mean, when you're in music school, like studying composition, like I did, those are the assignments frequently, is write music in the style of Arnold Schoenberg, 1923 Vienna, right? And it's a very academic exercise, but my heart wouldn't necessarily be in that particular exercise. Yeah, I think it is good though to challenge yourself to write things that you are unfamiliar with.
Mhm.
It's good to challenge yourself to learn about music you're unfamiliar with. And then a few years later, you will have digested that experience and it'll come out differently through you, in a way that is really original. I mean, like, I'm very thankful that I'm classically trained. I don't do anything with that education anymore, but I know that my music is different having gone through that process. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, of course, 100%. So as you were, I should have asked this earlier, I suppose, but as you were growing up then, um, what were who were the bands and who were the artists that you were actually mostly influenced by?
Yeah. Well, you've already mentioned one of them, Tool.
Mm?
So when I was 15, I got my first drum set and set about a task that I now know is quite difficult, which is learning their album Anima front to back on the drums.
Yeah.
Of course, now I realize how difficult that album is, but at the time, it was just this kind of heavy metal band that I really liked. So that was what a huge, huge influence. I still count Tool's Anima as one of my top 5 records of all time. Not even, I wouldn't say I'm a Tool fan. I
Hmm.
literally like that record.
Okay.
Yeah. And and then when I got into guitar, simply because the guitar player in my band left his guitar at my house once,
Nice.
I started getting into pop punk because, well, it was just about the easiest thing you could play on the guitar
Hmm.
and sound good when you learn these cool Blink-182 riffs and things like that. But those were some of my earliest influences. Really, when I started writing my own music is when I went to college. And by that point, I had taken kind of a deep dive into like the math metal world, like
Mm.
Dillinger Escape Plan, Botch, Converge, Refused, things like that.
That's quite a variety, and I suppose you need that, don't you? When I was started writing it, it was the big time of Blur versus Oasis,
Oh,
and
yeah.
yeah, and obviously Radiohead were knocking about at the time, that kind of around the time of the Bends. But I was really, really into the Verve, and I thought,
Mhm.
like, this is the kind of stuff I don't know if I thought this is the kind of stuff I can write, or if I thought this is the kind of stuff I will write, but it might have been somewhere in between. But I couldn't sing at all, and I remember going to, I don't know if you've had this experience, whether it's with your voice or with guitar or whatever. I went to New York for a few months, and I was there with like a couple of Oasis albums, a couple of Verve albums, and I had an acoustic guitar, and I just tried to sing along with the Verve. So now Richard Ashcroft is now the only person I can really mimic, because I just had to. But oddly enough, Brad, like this, it seemed to like tune my voice, or maybe I was growing in confidence in my voice, or um I don't know what it was, but I became kind of deeply steeped in that kind of music then, because it was, it was, and then you try to sing Tom York until he goes into his
Oh,
falsetto and you
no.
go, oh no, I'll leave it. But
Yeah.
sometimes you have to say, I don't know. I don't know if I'll drop the key or something. But that it's so around that age, that 14, 15 years of age, it becomes so much part of your life if you're into music. There's always a couple of groups that kind of just will always be there. Like you're saying about, which I found fascinating about Tool, because it seems like Tool fans are like Radiohead fans. They're proper fans. Like, you
Mhm.
can't say anything else, especially not on the internet, anything bad about them. But you decided to play, learn the drums for possibly one of the greatest drummers, of the last 30, 40 years. And you just walked home, well, I'm not trying to play this in drums. Not really, maybe knowing who Danny Carey was. And I love the idea of sitting down trying to learn his parts in particular.
Mhm.
Because like the time signatures, and it's just like he did to me. Someone like a musician like Danny Carey is like, I'm gonna I'm gonna try and make this nearly impossible for anybody to cover, and I enjoy it. Like, there's the whole,
Yeah.
if people haven't seen Danny Carey, there's that, I'm sure you've seen the video of him playing Numa in one of the concerts they were playing, and the cameras were on his drum kit, and it became so big because of just the skill level of the man, and him being kind of just so casual looking when he's doing it. I find the idea of you just going home and playing Tool songs pretty mad. It's just bizarre to me, because, it's like me going, I'm going to go home and play Hendrix now on my guitar.
Right. But remember that from like a from an I don't want to get in too much into like how
Hmm.
evolution plays into our musical learning, but we are far more likely to learn new things and dive into new things in our teens and 20s
Yeah.
than we are in our 30s and 40s. And so yeah, there are plenty of great drummers around right now who I listen to their parts and I'm like, oh, that would be cool to sit down and learn that, but I don't have a couple of hours to devote to that today, right? But I'm 16 years old. I'm in high school. I was playing drums sometimes like 6 hours a day,
Mm.
because you have that kind of focus when you're a teenager. I think that's the only reason I was able to do it.
It's a beautiful art, though. The drums, like I have an electronic kit, but I wish I had an acoustic kit, but logistics and all that. But when you talk about something like anxiety and you even talk about that build up that you have in you, like to sit down and play any instrument, obviously, but something in the drums because it's a little bit more physical and a little bit more demanding on you physically. I find that it releases a lot of tension for me.
Yeah, drums. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I can't say enough good things about how it is such a nice blend of physical activity, but also like concentration because I almost exclusively, you see the drum set behind me, almost exclusively my practice these days is I have a huge playlist on Apple Music of songs I've played along with for maybe 20 years. And I just I hit shuffle. And whatever comes on, I play along with it, note for note. And I'm thinking about, playing exactly in these micro pockets.
Mm.
I'm so concentrated. I'm not thinking about anything else in the world. But also sometimes because I play a lot of metal, I'm also sweating like crazy and
Yeah.
like my limbs, I'm getting exhausted. I can't think of anything else like that where besides mountain biking, to be honest with you, where I'm so mentally focused and also working so hard physically at the same time. Now, mountain biking is, of course, because like I don't want to crash,
Yeah.
right? Drumming because I'm trying to play in this tiny little micro pocket. And I'll just say, like, because you have a lot of musicians listening to this, it's fun to go back to those 90s records when they weren't playing with click tracks.
Mm.
And if as a person who in this modern day and age, I play everything with a click, um, all the music we listen to now is made with clicks. To play along with someone like Jimmy Chamberlain from Smashing Pumpkins, uh, to play along with, well, even those Tool records are cut without a click. You it's a different experience,
Mm.
that has a kind of push and a pull that um I don't want to mix metaphors here, but like almost like recalibrating to an uncalibrated sound,
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I put up on Instagram about 4 weeks ago that I was playing to my first click on the drums, and it was it's so bizarre because I never like when I was growing up I had the acoustic set and I used to just play like you did, just play it along to the music you liked. But I was just playing to a click, not anything particular, just a simple enough beat. But I was like, do I have timing? I don't know if I'm Ringo or anything. Why, because why is this
Yeah.
coming so quick? It seems to be going, and it's slow. It's something that I'm going to have to do because if I want to have, like you're saying, we all kind of play and record with a click now anyway. So I want to be able to do that. But it's such a bizarre feeling if you haven't done it before and you realize that push and the pull that you're saying, it's
Mhm.
like, and you see that live. I know, but I suppose a lot of people live are you playing to a click now too.
Yeah. Um, I've just you brought up Ringo, so I'm gonna go off on a little tangent here, but I have been obsessed recently with learning Here Comes the Sun,
Mm,
note for note. And I've got it now. I know the part exactly, but I cannot get that guy's feel. I end up ahead of the beat consistently. Um, yeah, such an interesting drummer, and I'll challenge any drummers listening to the podcast to, if you're not playing along with Ringo right now, particularly that track, because it has those odd time signatures, which is quite strange.
uh,
But just even when he's playing in 4/4 in the verses, getting that feel right is really tough.
I'm glad you brought it up because I've mentioned Ringo a few times on the podcast. We've had people talking about the Beatles. They're my favorite band. I mean, it's
Oh, oh.
not the most original pick, but I've loved them since I was in my early teens, and I'm always like advocating for people go and actually sit down and listen to Ringo play on certain songs, and just how good he is, and you see even some of the live performances and just the the mayhem of his playing, but like it just perfect for the and that's like it's not always easy to get for bands. There's like whether it's a drummer or a bass player or a guitarist, there's not a fit, but he seemed to be, I know he came after the other three, but he seemed to be like the perfect fit, and it's such a joyous thing. And I'm actually going to have to go and take up the challenge now and listen to Here Comes the Sun. And I mean, it's hardly a tough job sitting and listening to that song because it is one of my favorite Beatles songs. I want to ask you as well, Brad, because being a music professor, do you feel any sort of like pressure? I'm sure students know that you're creating music as well. Is there it's like a stand-up going to perform in front of a bunch of stand-ups. There's a bit of pressure to it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I spoke about this just a little bit earlier, but I think I am now at a phase in my career, certainly. I've just made full professor, which means there's I don't no more promotions to get, basically.
Okay.
I'm at a stage in my career where I really do not need to prove myself in any way right now. And like I said, I'm in a phase right now where I'm writing music that's in 4/4 time. And sure, there are some little Easter eggs in there. There are enough surprises that I can play a 30-second clip for my students, and I'll be like, all right, what's the chromatic chord I'm using? There are
Mm.
a few little surprises in there, but I certainly don't feel the need to make complicated music for the sake of my freshmen.
Yeah, I mean that's the I guess that's the years talking. If you're 25, you might be scrambling around trying to do those odd time signatures and stuff.
I
It,
I did once. I think I was 31. I was a very young professor, and I got asked to give a composition master class, and I titled it "Everything I Learned About Rock I Learned from Schubert."
oh.
And that was an example of me trying too hard. Like I have transcriptions of all my music counterpointed with bits of moments in Franz Schubert's music, so I can show you exactly where I learned this weird modulation or this weird chromatic chord. And I mean, I would give that lecture again, but it does seem like I was maybe trying a little bit too hard there.
Yeah, but I kind of like that. I like when it's there's two ways of looking at it. You say trying too hard. I say putting in a bit extra effort. That's the way I see it.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it
for sure.
sounds interesting to me. Like, the kind of idea of linking the two, your own music and Schubert. I'll give you a pass on that one. That's all right. You know, why did you like obviously you like Radiohead, but why did you write a book about Radiohead? Why did you feel the
Yeah.
need?
So the way that being a professor works, first of all, it's like a nationwide job search. And so I got this job and I'd already been writing a few articles about Radiohead. I think I wrote an article about um, like maximally even time signatures. And when Kansas hired me, basically it's called a tenure track job, and so there's 6 years. And I wanted kind of credit for the years I'd already been working these like 1 year jobs, and they said no. They said, no, we want you to start over. 6 years, go. And I said, well, if they were going to give me credit for what I've already done, I'll just knock out 3 or 4 more articles and be done with it. But if they say no and they make me start over, I am going to write a book instead of 6 articles. And so it was part of it was a very practical choice. I am a scholar. I like writing these scholarly articles that 47 people download on JSTOR. But I realized the potential for reaching a much larger audience of Radiohead fans if I published a book, right? And made some effort in making that book tone more accessible
Mhm.
for the fans. Now, if you read the Amazon reviews of my book, you'll find that I definitely overshot, and people are like, "You have to have a music degree to read this book." That's true for a couple chapters, I'll
Yeah.
concede. Um, if I had it to do over again, and who knows, I might write a second edition. I think I would make the entire thing sort of readable to a general audience. But I recently plugged for a podcast season that I recently co-wrote, Dissect.
Hmm.
We did a whole season devoted to In Rainbows. And um, I mean, the experience of, God's sake, I was on this gravel bike ride this morning, and somebody asked me, hey, have you heard of this podcast, Dissect? And I shared that I that I wrote that, and they were like, "Oh my God, you're the guy, I've heard about you." I'm not like tooting my own horn here. I'm saying that like there's one life of writing an article that 47 people read, and then there's this other way of being a scholar where tens of thousands of, if not 100,000 people right now have heard that season on In Rainbows on the podcast, and it's the most rewarding thing I've ever
Mhm.
done from a scholarly perspective. So now that I have nothing left to prove, I think I'm focusing more on writing in venues that people are actually going to engage with.
What I thought was like I agree on the book thing, and yes, there is a couple of chapters which are a little bit more difficult to understand, but it's like you have to appeal to everybody almost, like, and there's going to be people reading those chapters and they're going to be their favorite chapters because they do understand it. So, it's kind of like the balancing act of it. But when I was listening to Dissect, and people should listen to Dissect anyway because it's a really great podcast. But the Radiohead series and breakdown in each song. And I love that kind of stuff anyway, but when it's doing one of my favorite bands, it's kind of like even more kind of rewarding. And obviously you appeared on the podcast as well to talk about Radiohead. And um, I just thought that they're a band that have always kind of had a special place for me. I obviously remember Creep, but as it went after that, the albums grew and I got to see them live, and I just thought, I kind of became like maybe my second or third favorite band of all time. I appreciate someone going into the depth when they know what they're talking about with regards to music theory, obviously. Because we can all say, this is my favorite song because I like the chorus in this one. But when you can go into the actual depth and explain to me why I like it almost, because I mightn't think, maybe it's the time signature. I'm never going to sit there and kind of go, oh, maybe it's the time signature. That's why I love it. But if you mention it, it's kind of like it kind of opens up new things. And I like as music theorists, and I love the perspective of music theorists on different things because then it allows me to kind of voice oh, now I realize why that band means so much, or the album. Do you know what I mean? I kind of
Yeah,
waffling there a bit, but you know what I mean.
I love when you said opens up new things. I think
Mm,
as a music theorist and as kind of a public intellectual now, I think that that's my favorite thing still is showing people new ways to hear the music that they already
mhm.
love, right? I'm not purporting to actually explain to you why you like something. I think that's
No,
beyond my purview, but yeah, I love giving people new ways to hear music that they love and
yeah.
pointing out those little Easter eggs in Radiohead and actually working with Cole on Dissect. He's really helped me listen to lyrics more. I know that sounds like a no-brainer to most everyone, but as somebody who hears pitches and hears rhythms and hears chords, there's only so much room in my brain, right? And the first thing that's probably going to go is what the lyrics are. So linking these kind of structures that I'm so used to hearing with a deeper meaning in the lyrics has been a really great process, and Cole's been instrumental in helping me hear things like that.
Yeah, he is brilliant as well. And I've always been kind of more drawn to lyrics, I think. I'm immediately drawn to them. And I think when I started writing music, they were more natural. They came to me quicker and I was able to write them out. And then I was trying to fix music around them rather than maybe doing it the other way around or doing them together, whatever it might be. And I've always been straight tuned into kind of lyrics. And, you know, I'm 42 now, but they say you stop listening to new music when you're 26, right? That's just what they say. Okay. But when I want to hear like new lyricists, I'm always kind of dipping in and out, and sometimes people are over singing vowels and doing this kind of so where it's when it comes when the voice is kind of difficult to get past, so it's gonna to get into the lyrics, and we've got an amazing lyricist from Ireland here who recently got number one in America. We're all very proud, obviously. Hosier. Um,
Hmm.
and his lyrics I've always found to be absolutely brilliant and very intellectual, like Tom York's would be considered intellectual. I love that. Like, it's nice to hear "I love you" and "we love me" and all that kind of stuff. It's not, it's nice, but when you were really going deep and you almost have to research what the hell they're talking about. That's the kind of lyrics I go for.
Hmm. Yeah, I
And
once heard the Decemberists described as
mm,
thesaurus rock because
that's that's pretty good.
yeah,
But
my favorite
that's brilliant
lyrics.
though. I think
Yeah.
like reach for. make me reach for a dictionary. I want to find out, you know?
Yeah, or even I think you kind of disparaged on people who overval and you can't understand, but sometimes now with like Apple Music's lyric feature, it's fun to turn that on and listen to songs and be like, "Oh God, that's what he's saying," you know?
Oh,
Like,
really?
yeah, I don't know if people listen with lyrics on the screen now, but uh yeah, as somebody who is bad about listening to lyrics generally, but with the over voweling that people are doing today, it can be really illuminating to have sung along with something kind of phonetically for years and not realize what the words are.
It's there's a an English comedian called Peter Kay who does a skit around misheard lyrics, and
Oh
it's
yeah,
absolutely.
right.
Have you, yeah, it's absolutely it's brilliant. But we've all had that. Like, but I didn't even realize, and this is I'm not long on Apple Music. I'm on it a while. I didn't even realize you could get the lyrics on the screen. So there you
Hmm.
go.
There you go.
Maybe I need to figure it out. I was listening to
But
um They Will Never Tear Us Apart. What's it called? By In Excess yesterday, right? And I think he had the best diction when it came to singing. Every
hmm.
word is just like spot on. There's no like it's I don't know if it's the Australian in him. I don't know, but
Yeah.
there's something about the way he delivers it. Yeah, but that's kind of off topic. But
Well, I'll give you a opposite example to listen to. We have a 4-year-old, and having recently watched Ice Age, my 4-year-old's obsessed with "Send Me on My Way," the 1995 hit by Rusted Root. Uh, Listen to that one with the lyrics on screen and tell me that you understood those lyrics at any point in the last 30
is
years.
that so? Do I know that song? I probably do know the song. Would
Send
I?
me on my way. Send me on my way.
Oh, I
Everyone
do
knows,
know it.
right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
there's the
yeah.
chorus. Those will send me on my way. Everyone knows 5 words to that
Yeah.
song. But listen with the verse, and wow, that is some choice in diction going on there.
But I do like that as well.
You do?
Well, not all the time, but every so often you're like, what? Like, what are they saying? Google it straight away. Um, are you like? Because I'm someone who loves reading about not something. Yeah, obviously you're going to have as part of your job, you're going to have to read about music theory and stuff. Do you like reading about musicians though, about their lives, about like their influences, maybe their inspirations behind some of their songs?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I'm always I don't want to say hesitant, but I think we should take with a grain of salt what musicians say about their music. I say as you're asking me about my music, because there's this tendency to put too much weight in an artist's intention, and for me, the main problem with that is that's one person who wrote this song, which has then been interpreted by millions of people.
Hmm.
And I would say all those 1 million listeners have a valid interpretation of what the music capital M means
Yeah.
for them, right? And I think that that is just as important, and for those individual people, more important than what the artist themselves has said. I've said this a million times about Tom York, but I'll say it again. When people ask him what a song means, he has a lot of reasons for not telling you the truth.
Hmm.
So one of those reasons is he might like to seem like the aloof rock star, like, oh man, people just stroke their beards about our music, but it's just rock and roll, man.
Yeah.
Come on, there's no way you actually think
Yeah.
that. And then some artists actually have the opposite, right? They might have just like a melody came to them when they were sleeping, but they're like, yes, I calculated the Fibonacci sequence of the golden ratio and put
Mm,
and they wanted to seem more intellectual. And my favorite category of why we shouldn't pay attention to artists is like, you ask someone what they were thinking 20 years ago when
yeah.
they wrote a song, they're not going to remember,
Yeah.
right? They're going to make something up that sounds smart.
I cling on to the fact like Karma Police is my second favorite song of all time.
Oh, wow.
And I cling on to this idea and this, theory that went around that. So he sings the verses. And then he says, for a minute there, I lost myself. And somebody said that, like, he was all a dream and all the stuff, which is kind of, when you think about what he was saying in the verses, they could have possibly been, dream-like
Sure.
ideas. But for me, when I heard that, that stood out for me so much that like I really want that to be true. It probably isn't, but
Hmm.
I thought like imagine if that is really the truth. That is a work of genius that I can't quite reach. And everything about the song to me is amazing. But the idea that he dreamt the first part and then the second part was just he lost himself and he sings it
Yeah.
over and over. It's mad. It's something that's I'm gonna probably hang on to that idea, I think.
I like that. Well, and I like that that's one of those things that can be true for you, whether it was or
Mm,
not for him. But I mean, sometimes there are examples where you have to really know what the artist did to even make sense of what's happening. So here I'll point to the Radiohead song like Spinning Plates. If you know that one, the vocals sound so weird in that because famously he recorded a vocal take and then they hit reverse on the tape. And then he spent a week driving around Oxford listening to the reverse of his own voice. And he learned it phonetically and then sang that onto the record and they reversed that. So yeah, would anyone have gotten to that solution had we not heard from Tom how that happened? I
mm,
seriously doubt it
yeah.
that someone would have sussed that out on their own, right? So sometimes knowing the artist's intention or the artist's process is like absolutely necessary.
I went to see The Smile,
Oh, cool.
maybe 3 or 4 months ago, and I was blown away. And I really like their albums, and it's very easy to start going, well, is it as good as Radiohead? It's not Radiohead; it's a different band altogether. But um, because for someone who's been writing about Radiohead like yourself, like what did you think of The Smile when they emerged?
Yeah, I mean it's my two favorite musicians from Radiohead. No shade to the other three, four, three and a half. But I mean, the first time I really understood what they were doing artistically is when they did the Tiny Desk concert,
Mm,
NPR's Tiny Desk concert. And you can see in that performance that, look, I think it's brilliant songwriting, but I think what's going on technically between Tom and Johnny particularly is they're like, look, now we have kind of an opportunity to strip things back and let's just show the world how Tom York can play in 9/16 and sing at the same
yeah,
time effortlessly, right? I mean, the musicianship, the tightness that those two particularly have developed over the last 30 years. And look, they have an astounding drummer now as well. But
yeah.
I think it's a real study in how tight a band can sound and how technically proficient and yet effortless they can be.
I was sitting kind of so like where your kit is. I was sitting kind of up in the balcony, but I could see where the other Tom was playing the kit. And to be honest, it was very hard not to watch him, even though Tom York and Johnny Greenwood are on the stage,
Hmm.
because his rhythms and so the kind of idea of the loose wrists. People who haven't played drums might think you're supposed to play it like this, but he's playing it. He's hitting them the skins hard and all that, but he's playing with these kind of loose wrists. But I felt like that's I looked at it from the point of view maybe from him because I had seen Radiohead live, and and again I'm going to use your phrase, no shade on Phil Selway, of course, because I love him, but I don't know. Tom Skinner is just kind of a different because he's a jazz drummer. I think he was influenced.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's obviously a different genre altogether, but there's something really skilled and I suppose to for them something very very fresh about him being in the band that
hmm
allows them their songwriting to even expand it that little bit more.
he's such a different drummer than
Mm,
Selway. And Phil Selway, I think, is the perfect drummer for Radiohead.
yeah.
He is. I've said this before. He is. I think his closest analog is not Ringo. It's Charlie Watts,
Mm,
from Rolling Stones. I think that Radiohead needs a drummer that's just a rigid timepiece, and he is so solid.
mm.
And you can't imagine having like jazzy drum fills going on behind all of
Yep.
the rest of the three guitars of Radiohead. He is the perfect drummer from Radiohead. But yeah, I can see why. If you watch Phil Selway play, by the way, like he's got that kind of rigid,
Mm,
like the
yeah.
opposite of what you're talking about, the loose wrist. His whole body bounces up and down with his limbs. Um, uh, and yet he's clearly figured out a way not to hurt himself, so his wrists are fine for sure.
Yeah, he's still going strong. Um,
Yeah.
is Hail to the Thief still your favorite Radiohead album?
I on the very last episode of Dissect, Cole put this question to me, and I kind of ruminated on it a little bit. It's one of those things where I've said it for so many years, it's hard to for it not to be the truth. But I think part of me liked Hail to the Thief as my favorite Radiohead record, kind of because it was an odd choice.
Mm.
I mean, I have a real musical reason for liking it, that it's the perfect synthesis of the 90s rock sound with the 2001 bleepy bloop electronic. It's exactly where they got those two things together. I think it's probably their second hardest record to listen to in terms of accessibility. I think it's right up there with The King of Limbs in terms of it might be a musician's record.
Mm.
You know what I mean? But so my finally, I'm coming back to it now. Working on In Rainbows for an entire season and doing the deepest dives that you can imagine in each of those songs did reveal to me that it is a more complex record than I
Yeah.
thought, and that it might actually be in my book I talk about kind of like the Goldilocks zone, the Goldilocks principle. It may actually be the the sweet spot between accessibility and experimentalism in their catalog.
I am. I'm always fascinated by how it's going to sound silly, like how popular In Rainbows is in America because it's popular here as well. Like Radiohead fans love it, but uh, I hear more about Americans liking that, maybe having that as their number one Radiohead album
Hmm.
compared to over here, where it still seems to be OK Computer. A lot of people will
Yeah.
mention, you get a few will say Kid A, um, but I think they're just trying to be a little bit more, like you said, going against the grain, maybe a bit trendy, I suppose, or something that. But I honestly still think that uh, people love all their albums, but it always seems to go back to OK Computer, and maybe that was just timing, or
I think so. I think
yeah,
yeah. You brought up like kind of the history of Brit rock over there, and
yeah.
you had these like the Blur Oasis wars. But what's interesting is like timeline wise, that had kind of, at least from my understanding as a non-Brit, had kind of played itself out by 97, and
Mhm.
maybe you all were just ready for something else when OK Computer came out.
I agree. Because I think when even the way Blur went, they decided to switch everything up, and they're one of my favorite bands too. But they decided to go release what they would say was an American album. So they were getting kind of almost coming on the grunge train
Sure,
about 3 years too late, which is very odd. But again, I love that. I think it's a great album anyway. But it's always fascinating to me, that idea, like favorite albums of bands and favorite albums in general can be they're great to discuss and kind of quibble over or whatever. But I love Hail to the Thief, and I love Punch Up at a Wedding. Nobody ever mentions Punch Up at a
sure.
Wedding. I love the bass line in Punch Up at a Wedding is just brilliant. But do you get
Doom, doom.
yeah,
Yeah.
just that it's like, because it's just, and it stays on it really, and then the piano
Mhm.
comes in, and then it's a pity I never get to see them play that song live, because I would have enjoyed it. Do you get jaded by the Radiohead stuff?
Jaded. Tell me
Yeah.
more. What do you mean?
I mean, because you're always like you're always asked on podcasts about Radiohead, and I'm sure, like you said, like people talking to you this morning about Radiohead. It's not just a kind of fun thing that people ask me about the Beatles, but I don't have to go on podcasts to talk about the Beatles. You it's part of your job now because you've written a book
Yeah.
about them.
No, I think that's probably a testament to the band themselves. There's always more to talk about with
Yeah.
Radiohead. If I were a scholar of, I'm just gonna say it once, Nirvana, right? I mean, first of all, there's only what, 3 or 4 records to talk
Mhm.
about, in a very limited scope of time. But the Radiohead has such a vast catalog, and not only that, they kind of reinvent themselves from album to album, and there's just such a density of kind of complexity in each of the songs. Like I am sure that I will die, hopefully an old man, having never exhausted the possibilities of talking about Radiohead with people. I quite love it, and I've never felt jaded.
Well, that's the good to hear, because obviously I like reading about Radiohead, and we've actually mentioned my three favorite bands. Nirvana came up there, so we have the Beatles, Radiohead, Nirvana. So we've got
Hmm.
the sweepstakes. So you've mentioned about mountain biking and stuff. What else do you like to do in your spare time?
Oh, I mean, mostly bikes. So I spend a fair amount of time riding bikes, mostly gravel and mountain bikes. But then I also just like the older I get, I'm a tinkerer. I like to fix bikes. I spend a lot of time looking at new bikes on the internet. Maybe an unhealthy amount of time. Kind of obsessed about bikes. In terms of other activities, though, that actually like I've been a rock climber longer than I've been,
Oh, really?
or as long as I've been a mountain biker. So I rock climb in the gym a few times a week, just as a way to stay in shape. Um, for going outdoor climbing, because they have some really nice outdoor climbing down in the Ozarks. Here we get there a little bit less now with a 4-year-old, but
Yeah.
he's actually just started. Got him a climbing harness, and so
Oh, wow.
we're excited to take him in the woods rock climbing with us probably this next fall. Love traveling, love backpacking.
It's all like good physical
Yeah,
and
that's kind
and
of my
mental
thing.
stuff. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's like aside from music, almost everything else I like is outdoorsy, pack your stuff in some kind of bags, go overnight, rough it for a while. That's kind of my only other passion outside of music.
Which is like the opposite to most musicians who don't leave the house, like, Well, at least the
Right,
stereotype.
or who are like afraid of hurting their wrists on a mountain bike. I mean,
Yeah.
that was a real concern in my 20s. I kind of gave up mountain biking for a few years because, there was a while where I might have thought my livelihood was going to be as a professional musician and land on your wrists wrong once. Like there goes
Yeah.
several instruments for you. But now I've realized that, as long as I can type, I can probably get a paycheck. So
Yeah, well, yes, and but with mountain biking, for instance, because I've never done, actual mountain biking, um, is there a pressure on the wrist for that? Or, that just,
sure. Yeah, I mean
yeah,
it's like drumming. You can do it right and you can do it wrong.
okay,
You can over grip the bars anytime you get scared and end up with a tingling that goes up your arm for a couple days. Or you can learn to relax, engage the core, flow with your body. Like it
mm,
really is quite a bit like I'm sure you play guitar, so
hmm,
you've hurt your left wrist a little bit from playing the wrong
yeah,
way and holding the pick the wrong way. There are right ways to do it and wrong ways to do it.
yeah. Well, like we don't in jiu-jitsu now. We don't want any rock climbers because they've got ridiculous grips, and you
They
can't
sure
break the
do.
grip. Then they just have the hold of you, and you're like,
Uh-huh.
well, I can't get the grip off now. That's
Yeah,
not.
my party trick, and no one will be able to see this on the podcast, of course, but if you put your finger right there, I can just like
Ah,
can push against people's hands with that weird grip muscle right
that
there.
is weird. Yeah.
And that's only rock climbers who get that muscle from what I can tell.
No, they will be able to see this. This is going up on YouTube. Don't worry. They'll see the full, like, there's no way I could get a camera shot like yours. I've got a washing machine in the back of my shot, and you've got a drum kit. I mean, the
Well, this is
difference.
funny. I didn't I had no idea this was going to be televised, so I'm just
Yeah.
in like quarters up here. I could have dressed up a little bit more, but hello world.
Hello. I'm just wearing a t-shirt.
Yeah, okay.
That's my gym, so I have to kind of wear, like, sponsor. But Brad, where can people find your music and your book and all that kind of stuff?
Sure. I kind of have an anti-Amazon thing, so please find my book, Everything in Its Right Place, Analyzing Radiohead at your local bookstore
Hmm.
or from Oxford University Press's website because it's a not-for-profit. If Radiohead's not your thing, I also wrote a book called Interpreting Music Video,
Hmm.
Popular Music in the Post-MTV Era that's all about deep diving into music videos. In terms of my music, it's just on all the streaming
Yeah.
services. Darkapelago. We have five. Who is it? I don't know. We're
Yeah.
all
Who
a
knows?
collective anyway. We had just released our fifth EP called Evil Scissor on all of the streaming services.
Brilliant. And people should have, and I know I mentioned about your 2020 work, and just I suppose it worked for me to listen to it because it's so different. The songs are almost so different to each other, like I mentioned before, and people should go and listen. Maybe use that as a starting point. Maybe use the new stuff as a starting point. So it doesn't really matter where you start. But just the idea of, especially if you like the Pet Shop Boys. No, that just a little bit. Also, I will say it is true about the Radiohead book. Like, people. You'd feel, oh, I must like Radiohead to like this book. But I think people who are really into music and how it's written and how it can be interpreted, I think it's very important. These kind of books are really important anyway. And maybe you'll get into Radiohead from it. But either way, you'll learn. Brad, you've been a fantastic guest, and I can't thank you enough for doing it.
Thank you so much, Derek. It's been my pleasure.
You're welcome. If you don't mind sticking with me for 1 minute, I'll close this off, take my usual photo for the promo, and then we'll be on our way. Is that all right?
Sounds great.
Thanks, Brad. I also have to thank John for doing the tech stuff for YouTube. Um, Oh, by the way, if you're going on YouTube, I actually just yesterday, set up a music channel on YouTube, Derek Wheatley Music. If you want to subscribe to it too, nothing to do with this podcast. Well, it's a music anyway. I always thank my mum and dad, granddad, Jared and Calvin. Subscribe to our YouTube if you would. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, Spotify, Apple Anchor, all those ones. Google Podcasts is no more. Uh,
Hmm.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know why that went, but it's gone now anyway. Anyway, thanks very much to everyone who tuned in today, visually and also audibly. And once again, Brad, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, we're gone. See you next week. Bye.